Got it.
If you could clap when you start, that'd be cool.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, Matt, clap like a seal. Like Slappy the Seal. Did you ever see that movie?
Oh, no.
I don't even remember the premise other than these kids found a seal and they named him Slappy. And
Well,
he became one of their gang.
Seems like an appropriate name for a seal.
Yeah. But he would constantly.
Okay. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. 3, 2, 1. Howdy, folks. It's Mackenzie and Brad on another edition of Smoke-Filled Room. Bradley, happy end of session. Happy Sunny Die.
Yeah, well, Sunny Die was a couple days ago, but yeah.
I'm still wishing it. I just thought wishing good things to you would be received with maybe some more warmth, but I should have known better.
That's not me.
That's very, very true.
You clearly don't know me after 6 years. Jeez, come on.
Do you feel like your general mood has improved since the end of session, or do you feel the same? Do you feel burnt out?
I feel the same because everything continues to happen.
Yes,
there's been no
true.
downturn.
Which we'll get to.
Nonstop ever since the gavel hit.
You weren't sunburned though from your boat excursion on post Sunny Die, so that's a win.
I am sunburned, just not as bad as I have been before.
Okay.
The dang cloud burn got me.
To the point where it's causing you pain, or just annoyance?
Very low level.
Okay.
So pain, yeah, nothing unbearable. I can ignore it fine, but yeah.
Well, it's better than the previous time.
And I did put sunscreen on this time. And
what SPF?
I don't remember.
That's important.
I was a few Coors banquets in, okay? I don't recall the number on the
your
sunscreen
SPF
bottle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, next time maybe just opt for a little bit of a higher level of protection, and you'll be fine.
I should.
Well, folks, happy end of session to all y'all too. This has been a wild one, but also a little bit less wild than maybe.
Kumbaya session? Should we coin that?
Yeah, I think we should coin that.
Coin that.
It's definitely not gonna, we're not gonna get in trouble for copyright infringement,
Trademark.
being that
Kumbaya
certainly
session.
has been thrown around in the past.
Well,
it
very nearly wasn't at the end.
Does the Kumbaya session, like the first coined one from, was that 2019?
Yeah.
2019? Does that feel like forever ago to you?
Well, that was my first introduction to Texas politics, so it's always rooted as a point of, relativity to me.
Yeah.
With all this stuff.
But does it feel like forever ago? It feels like forever ago to me.
Feels like a lot more hair ago.
Oh, should I read no, that's going to be hard to find. We've been texting so much the last couple of days. But I did say that we should do like a before and after of Brad, of how he fared during session from start to finish. And one of the litmus tests I threw out there as evidence of your stress levels was a before and after picture of the back of your head from January to June. Oh, man.
Nobody looks at the back of my head more than you do, thanks to the situation in the office. So.
Yes. I literally have a window in my office that looks out onto the back of Brad's head, which is just a bummer for him.
Yeah. It's like your own personal little art gallery.
My personal art gallery. Oh, boy. But it's exciting. Session's ended. We'll talk a little bit about the possibility of potentially legislating more this year. But for now, it's over. 89R, regular session, complete.
Well, and I guess we'll just say this now before we forget, but thanks to everybody for following and reading, watching, listening to all of our stuff. It's nice to know we're not just screaming out into a void.
It feels that way sometimes.
Yeah.
When you just record and publish and do so from the confines of an office or wherever it is, it does feel like that sometimes, but there's been so much engagement from folks that's been incredibly encouraging.
But it's great walking around the Capitol and hearing people come up to us, even if I've never seen them before, don't know them, talk about how they like the show or they like our writing and that kind of thing. So we really appreciate it, and we're glad to have an audience.
A friend of Rob's came up to him and said, oh my gosh, you work at the Texan? Do you know Brad Johnson? And Rob, I think
haven't heard this.
I think his eyes rolled out of his head when he heard that. And he said, yes, he tells me to go expletive. He basically made a point that you lob plenty of yes, this person lobs expletives at me every single day. I do know Brad Johnson. Which,
well, and I was just doing him a solid and loosening him up. And now he lobs it right back at me. So it's great. It's great office dynamic.
Yeah, you guys definitely do so the most.
I would rather it be that way than everyone walking on eggshells. And I stomp on all the eggshells.
Yeah, but you also, Brad, cause people to walk on eggshells when you're in a bad mood.
No, that's true.
Yeah, it is a terrifying moment. But seriously, in all seriousness, we do so appreciate everyone tuning in. It's been, I think the longer we exist each session, it becomes more and more fun for us to do our jobs because our team, one, they are just increasingly talented and great at what they do. And I'm so proud of y'all. But also our audience, I think, becomes more and more engaged with what we do, which provides so much fodder and encouragement for us to just kind of plug away at what we do.
Yeah. So, to everyone inside and outside the building, cheers. Happy Signing Day.
Happy Signing Day. Well, today we're going to talk about all sorts of different things. First of all, and this will take up the vast majority of our time, we're going to talk about top 5 moments of session. Pivotal key points that change the trajectory of what happened legislatively or politically. So we'll walk through those. We'll also talk about the potential of a special session and what that might look like this summer. Brad also alluded to all of this, just internal craziness happening that hasn't really stopped since Signing Day happened, that there has been really no reprieve. And so we'll get into exactly what we're talking about there. We also want to talk about the new President Pro Tem and his speech on the Senate floor this week. So lots to get into today. But Brad, why don't we go ahead and start off with our top 5 moments of session. Let's start with number 1. We want to get into, obviously the speaker's race was a huge deal at the beginning of session, but I think
historic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've waxed eloquence about that probably far too much at this point. But a specific moment we want to talk about during session that was a key turning point in how Speaker Burrows is perceived by the House or by those outside the chamber was the motion to vacate. Walk us through what happened.
So when we were talking about this, first I said, the speaker vote itself. But that was literally the first day, and there was a lot that happened in between. But I think the dividing line between what we thought session might look like and what session turned out to actually be was the motion to vacate. The motion to try and oust the speaker by Representative Brian Harrison in the middle of session, and he got a whopping 2 votes for it with him. And one was even half-hearted. We saw what the other person that voted with him issued a statement afterwards and kind of
Representative David Lowe
walked back at least some of his commitment to this general attempt, right? The reason I think it's kind of a dividing line is there was a lot of still lingering irritation and enmity between the two factions of the Republican Party in the House caucus. Always, which was such a brutal political fight before session, you're going to have the natural gravity of people just like, all right, let's get this past us. He's the speaker. I'm not going to throw bombs anymore. I want to get my stuff done, right? I'm going to work with the speaker. The speaker reached out to almost all the members to try and get them at least somewhat on board with the plan going forward and trying to march everyone in unison one direction, at least vaguely one direction, right? But this moment and how much it ended up backfiring seems to be the thing that unified the caucus more than anything we thought could actually happen in this session. Now, it's not to say it was all hunky-dory throughout. It's not to say there weren't little gripes here and there between members or between leadership and certain faction. But this is the moment when we saw what was left of the reform group become less of an outwardly opposite force, right? There's only one person that was really trying to throw bombs all session in the House, and that was Representative Harrison. Most of his at least previous friends up until that point, largely abandoned that general attitude toward leadership.
At least that pointed toward
Right.
leadership. But there
Right.
were certainly policy instances
Oh,
where
right.
they would take to the back mic and make their
Right.
point on conservative issues
Right.
or GOP priorities.
And we saw it kind of boil up even after the speaker vote in the rules fight, right? That caused a lot of abrasion between the camps. And, I get it. Rules are supposed to be debated, right? Like, that's what was said over and over again. We're going to have commitments were made about we're going to debate these things, have it out on the floor and see where the votes fall. It didn't happen because the question was called on the rules about an hour and a half in.
Which means that the vote was rushed, essentially.
Vote was ended. All the amendments that were going to be attempted to be tacked on weren't, and they voted the rules through. So at that point, from my perspective, I'm like, oh man, this thing can go really off the rails. And based on how brutal the speaker election was, both behind the scenes and publicly, it was hard to see anything happening other than just constant fights throughout session, and the speaker struggling to maintain a majority even more than speakers already do under normal circumstances, right? So that was that point, but then the motion to vacate happens and you get 2 votes for it. One was half-hearted, and that is just an entirely different dynamic.
And a lot of that, I think, specifically talking about the reform group and their reticence to continue to lambast House leadership, I do think in large part is due, and we talked about this before, is due to the fact that there was not necessarily the same retribution tactic levied by House leadership against those members who were opposed to Burrow's speakership, saying, okay, you voted against me, or you're in the top, X% of the conservative majority. I'm not going to allow you to have amendments that pass or bills that are filed and heard on the House floor. Like, that did not, and certainly behind the scenes, there were conversations that we are not privy to.
Right.
But in large part, you'd see members who were very adversarial toward Burrows in the speaker's fight. And even in the first couple of months of session, find their way to the front mic and pass bills, tack amendments on. And you didn't see these kind of votes where folks were just voting against someone because of what their name was, in the same way that we've seen in previous sessions with different leadership.
Well, I watch, there were about 5-6 members that I spent a lot of time watching on the floor because they were the ones doing a lot of the stuff. One of those was Tony Tinderholt, who is now not returning to the Texas House. He has announced his retirement, and he is instead running for Tarrant County Commissioner in that newly drawn Republican precinct.
Which, if you are interested in some local scuttlebutt that has incredible political implications, go follow Kim Roberts reporting about the Tarrant County redistricting fight, because it is fascinating.
Very much so. But he was one of the ringleaders of the opposition group of conservative members on the right flank of the caucus. And there was a photo I took of him, or of the group generally, huddling. I think it was on deadline night. And Tinderholt, you can see him easily because he's bald and sticks out like a sore thumb. But you look at the photo and everyone's eyes are locked on him. He's the one strategizing. Which
in a lot of the speeches surrounding his retirement that folks were honoring him with, they said the exact same thing. Like, where Tony went, we went. Or Democrats would go to Tinderholt to be like, hey, I need your help on this bill. I think you actually might be amenable to it. You know you can sway some votes.
Yeah. Also, anyway, so he was the ringleader there, one of the couple of ringleaders. Another one I would say is probably Mitch Little, whose voice carried a lot of weight in that crowd. There were some votes that his opinion swayed people one way or the other because they trusted him. They trusted his assessment on things. But Tony was talking with the speaker a lot. We'll just watch him on the floor. He's constantly going up and talking with Burrows on the dais, negotiating stuff, right? They were having negotiations in the back hallway on getting certain policies across the line.
And the needle was moving.
It was. And, I think one thing you can cite on that is Texas GOP put out a statement on Sine Die touting the apparently 37 legislative priority bills that passed,
which I believe is the most.
which is a lot,
yeah.
right?
Now, the legislative priority committees did, put their weight behind hundreds of bills this session, which is
Right.
a pretty hefty task to try and get all of those across the finish line.
Yeah. Well, they had like broad categories rather than specific ones, right?
And then each legislative priority committee, if I'm not mistaken, chose a myriad of bills that aligned with that priority, that
Right.
one broad category.
Right. So,
But it was still a lot of bills that
Yes.
passed the finish line that were priorities of the Republican Party.
to your point originally about bringing people in and working with them, you look at the 287G program. AJ Louderback, who voted against the speaker, was one of the chief negotiators on that and designers of the final bill on that program, or on that legislation, SB 8.
Specifically, like federal authorities and local sheriffs being able to work in coordination. But it's like that's what that bill was aiming to do.
Yep. You look at bail reform, and whose face was up there alongside Chairman Smithy's the entire time, Mitch Little.
Who was also the GOP caucus freshman of the year.
Yeah.
Which says a lot.
To your point on that, the leadership here, it was not all smooth sailing, but they did not just go on a retribution tour against members who voted against them. Really, the only one that they maintained consistent opposition to was Harrison, and that was going in both directions, right?
That April Fool's mentioned by the speaker will go down in infamy.
Yeah.
When Harrison was on the back mic, I forget what he was aiming for in that exchange, but the speaker said, "You're not recognized even on April Fool's, Mr. Harrison." Like, that tells you everything, I think, about their dynamic.
Yeah.
It just was the nature of the beast. Even David Cook, who was the candidate that all these members were supporting in the speaker's race as opposed to Burrows, certainly had his time where he was at the front mic passing bills. Like, he was very influential on different issues.
I think he was involved in the bail reform stuff as well.
Absolutely.
So, anyway, that's the moment I see where things really changed in the House. And Burrows had already been working well with the lieutenant governor. They weren't fighting openly like the last speaker did, like Dave Phelan did with the lieutenant governor. And that interchamber harmony became, for the most part, intra-chamber harmony after this vote.
It's very true. And of course, Burrows knew the lieutenant governor is a favorite of the sect of the party that he was being criticized most heavily by. And so working with him and having a good relationship with the lieutenant governor was a huge deal in all of this. And we've seen that continue even post-signing diet bill signing ceremonies, the lieutenant governor saying very, affirming things about the speaker and his role in different policy fights, like bail reform. So fascinating to watch all of it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Should we move on to number 2, Bradley?
Let's do it.
Want to lead us in?
Sure. The policy we were all most watching going into this session was, of course, school choice, ESAs, vouchers, whatever you want to call it. Everyone has different names.
Brett always does this when he leads on this.
Two of the terms are very much marketing-based terms. They have connotations, either positive or negative. The most neutral one, I think, is ESAs, education savings accounts. Mostly because you ask any random person what that is, and they're like, I have no freaking idea.
Which is why we also throw in the others to make sure everyone knows what we're talking about.
So that was the most anticipated vote of the session, I think, after everything that happened last year and Governor Abbott going on the full-scale primary war against a lot of House incumbents and defeating a good amount of them.
Except for 2.
Yeah. He managed to flip enough seats that this thing passed. And it didn't just pass by the narrowest of margins. They ended up getting, 86 votes?
Yes.
Every Republican, including the speaker, except for 2, voted for this thing on the floor. And I think that's probably the second top moment.
That vote.
Yeah. In the House.
And to your point that you were, referring to earlier about Tinderholt and his influence increased in large part also because he has been around for a long time at this point, 6 terms, and there was a slew of freshmen coming in who aligned with his ideology. And so his group got bigger and he became the ringleader of that group, right? So when we're talking about, I mean, last session, that sect of the party was much smaller than it was this session. And so when that new class of freshmen came in, Tinderholt and his crew's influence became far more broad.
Yeah. Also, though, not every member that came in, even if they came in as an Abbott candidate, or at least on the Abbott wave, was fully throated behind ESAs. There was a lot of hand-wringing behind the scenes about the way the bill looks and what does it actually do, what's the effect.
On both sides of the Republican caucus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In Tinderholt's group too, right? Eventually everyone jumped in line and voted for it except for Dade Phelan and Gary Van Dever. But one of the biggest things that I think pushed people that way, even if they had some hesitation, was the Trump call in the caucus. And the day of, they convened the Republican caucus meeting, and Governor Abbott was in there. He got President Trump on the line. The president said, basically, if you vote for this and pass it, I will endorse you in your primary or election next year generally. And obviously that is, especially after the effect that the Trump endorsement had last cycle, that is a massive get for any of these people. Especially if they're projecting another difficult primary fight, right? We're already seeing today's Wednesday, we're recording on Wednesday. I've already seen 3 members of the House who are, not in that further right wing of the caucus, announcing for re-election, and they announced as Trump endorsed candidates because the president gave them their endorsement.
Why bury the lead?
Yep. So that's how big this was for them, and they got the votes on it. But it wasn't just that did it. That was provided a good bit of cover. But then Buckley, Patrick, Creighton, Abbott, the speaker, they all negotiated this deal with rural Republicans, the Drew Darbys of the world, the Jay Deans, guys like that who either voted explicitly against this last session, voted for the Rainey Amendment, voted to strip the ESAs out, or they have not been, super supportive of it in the past, just generally. But they got all of them on board except for those 2, Phelan and Van Dever, because they negotiated some additions to SB 2 itself, and then negotiated some promises about school funding that would come later. Now that was a bit of a contentious thing in the moment when we saw different plans crop up. Specifically, these rural Rs, according to them, were told that a lot of this money would go towards the basic allotment increase. Well, ultimately, that's not the BA increase the House adopted did not get put into the final version. Now they found a different way around the same thing, but
it wasn't so cut and dry. It was not what it was negotiated.
Right, and so that caused some heartburn among these guys. They still voted for SB 2, and now we're going to see this thing. This thing's not done as an issue. This is going to be every little bump in the road that this program goes through in implementing it is going to be a huge political issue, right? And not only that, but you're going to have a new comptroller actually establishing this. Glenn Hager's gone in 20-ish days, 25 days or so. So not only do you have a campaign being run to replace him, but there's a lot of talk about who Abbott is going to appoint to fill the seat.
And that being so directly tied to his top legislative priority.
Right. So that, I think, has to be the number two moment.
If you would have told us 6 months ago that Drew Darby would be on the list of members voting for this ESA bill, we would have thought you were absolutely out of your mind.
Well, yeah. Both on this podcast and at our event, we had him on, and he did not hold back. He was very, very critical of anything looking like
and took the lead on being critical.
Mind.
Like he was the voice for a lot of these rural Republicans.
Yep. And in the end, he felt like he got enough to justify, not stepping on the live grenade that would have been, torpedoing this ESA program again. We'll see what happens down the road, but at least for now, they felt comfortable enough to take the jump.
Absolutely. Well, number 3, if you have anything else you want to add on school choice?
No. Take us to number 3.
Number 3, I think we'd be remiss to not talk about the lieutenant governor and some of the priorities that he laid out at the very beginning of session. Some were very surprising, for sure. We were like, wow, this seems out of left field. But a moment we specifically want to talk about today is the THC Presser, where the lieutenant governor made it he was very ardent about passing a THC ban in Texas. And after the bill passed, he held a press conference where he advertised that there would be snacks, that press should be there. And, our guys got there. I think Cameron and Mary Elise were the ones who got there and were covering that for us. And there was a, blanket over a table where the snacks were.
It looked like a dead body.
I wasn't going to say it, but it did. And come to find out, underneath are a bunch of THC-laden products that the lieutenant governor was specifically aiming at banning with this legislation. And really, the lieutenant governor took aim at the press in this press conference and lambasted them for their coverage of the issue. And it was very interesting to watch this happen because, like I said, the lieutenant governor had some very interesting policy fights that were part of his ethos this session. I think film incentives, THC ban, and the Dementia Prevention Research Institute are top of mind for me when I think about those. And
not very stereotypical Patrick. At least that we've seen the last couple.
And very big, for lack of a better word, projects that were kind of like feather in the cap for him in some ways. Like, hey, I want to get these things across the finish line. These are big projects. And certainly not inexpensive projects either, which I think is very notable. But this press conference specifically sticks out to us just because of how it happened, the posture that the lieutenant governor had. It was very adversarial. And
he literally threw a bag of edibles at a reporter.
And clips made their way all over social media when, certain questions were posed by the press that where the lieutenant governor's answers were very ardent and very adversarial, confrontational, and he made no qualms about that. It was very interesting to watch. And again, this is all after the bill had been passed.
Yes.
Now, it is important to note that there was and continues to be significant pressure put on the governor to veto this piece of legislation.
Yeah. That's what he was responding to.
That's what he was really responding to. And it is notable, too, that we're recording Wednesday. Yesterday, the governor was in Houston signing some bail reform legislation, pivotal. We'll talk about that in a minute. But he was asked about Senate Bill 3, the THC ban, and whether he would veto it. And he said, I have 1,000 bills on my desk. I'll evaluate each one. Very open-handed in that response. But we'll see what happens.
Overall, my impression of Patrick and the reason things looked at the outset and throughout the way they did is, you look at his list of priorities, and there are a couple red meat conservative things, but not like we've seen in the past. It was a different kind of priority list for Patrick. And you mentioned Diprit, you mentioned the Hollywood thing, THC. I think my read on it was this is a very legacy-focused list of priorities. Yeah, stuff he can, whenever he is done, whether that's before he seeks re-election next time or he has announced for re-election or through another term or whatever it is.
And he's been very vocal that he's running for re-election.
Yes.
But jury's out till that happens.
Yeah. And it smacks to me of this is stuff he can point to when he's out of office, in a rocking chair, just chilling on his porch with his grandkids and point, I did that. Maybe he gets his name on Diprit whenever that's constructed. Or maybe he is watching a Texas-made movie and he says, we did that, right? It's kind of stuff that will scratch that itch, I think. It's not the putting 10 commandments in schools. This stuff, there's a reason it was so heavy on this kind of thing. and which entailed a lot of pretty difficult political fights for him, especially from the outside. And he waded into that without a second thought. There's a lot, this THC thing, there's opposition on both sides of the political spectrum to this. It's not just left-wingers that hate this.
And I think it's very safe to say that if you look at that vote on SB3 in the House specifically, and if it were to be, we've talked about this at length in the office, if it were to be a secret ballot, I think you may have the same result. It probably would pass, but the political makeup would be so different. So different.
Why do you say that?
Because I think so many of those Republicans would have voted against it. Secret ballot, there's a lot of them that would be opposed to this kind of thing on simply a libertarian bent in some way, right?
But then would there be those who voted against it publicly who voted for it?
I think potentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, if you said it would probably come out to about the same.
That's my hypothesis.
Okay.
I think it would be a little bit less, but I think it would still pass.
Okay.
I think is 80 something that it was pretty much a partisan vote.
Yeah.
I think it would be a little bit less, but I think it would still pass.
Yeah, I don't remember any Democrats voting for that, but
I don't think they
if
did.
there were, it was like Richard Raymond and Sergio Munoz.
Exactly.
Right?
The typical characters in that play.
Yeah.
But my point being that there were certainly members who received a ton of pressure from the lieutenant governor heading into that vote who voted a certain way in an aim to say, okay, well, if I vote for this, I'll get this. Yeah. Now, we're also federally in a very different political climate. I think that's worth noting, too. It's not just in Texas where these kinds of arguments are being had or this kind of policy is making its way through the process with very little Republican opposition.
Yeah.
But a few sessions ago, I think it would have been a very different makeup. A secret ballot, a very different makeup.
Well, you mentioned federally. Trump is at least in stated positions on social media, which I know that's not exactly bulletproof and that can change by the day with Trump, but he has put out opposition to things like this. And so that puts the president and his most avid supporter in Texas at loggerheads on that. Now, does the president want to die on that hill? It doesn't look like it so far. But it's an interesting dynamic, and it's fascinating to see the lieutenant governor go out on a limb so much and realize he's behind the eight ball in a PR fight, because he was. He still probably is. Doesn't mean he's not going to win, and he looks like he's winning right now. But there is.
Say what you will about the lieutenant governor, but he tends to win these kinds of.
I mean, when you have veterans coming out and saying, intimating that Dan Patrick doesn't like veterans or whatever, or he intentionally wants to make it harder for them to live their lives. That's what they were saying at their press conference.
That's the angle.
That is very pointed, and that is not an easy PR hill to climb.
Nor a demographic that the lieutenant governor wants to find himself at odds with.
Exactly.
But yeah, that press conference was a big deal and continues to be, and I think really boils down to that moment for me, even on other issues, where this is where the lieutenant governor was at behind the scenes on all of his big issues this session. It was a very competitive, we're going to make this happen, we're going to win this political fight.
He did not back down at all.
Absolutely.
And still hasn't.
And this was one issue where it happened in front of the public eye, specifically in front of the media.
Now what the House got out of it was an expansion of Teacup. And there's some fights over the language. I think ultimately what they settled on was acceptable to all sides. There are still those who don't like it, and those who say, like Chad Hasty, who you're on his radio show every week, he's very much against this. And he said, I heard him say that the other day that, well, okay, an expansion of Teacup is great, but it's still going to cost a lot more money to get enrolled in that, and then more money to buy the stuff.
The compassionate use program.
We're talking about. Than to just go buy it at one of these shops over the counter.
Right.
Over the counter. It's not, it's kind of used as like a medicine, but it's not explicitly so.
Right.
So there's still, it's going to be fascinating to see what Abbott does. I don't know if I'm too confident on this anymore, but my running bet had been in my own head that Abbott would just let it go into effect and not sign it, because if by 60 days later, some amount of days later, if he doesn't sign or veto a bill, it goes into effect.
I believe it is 60 days.
60?
I'll confirm.
Okay.
It's either 60 or 90.
So that was kind of my hunch that Abbott would do. I don't know if that's the case anymore. He could do something like veto the bill and then apply similar restrictions or oversight through like executive off agency actions, right? But I think right now it's kind of up in the air what the governor's going to do, and he's getting pressured from all over the place on this to veto the thing. And I'm sure he's getting pressured from the lieutenant governor to not veto it, to sign the dang thing, right? So where does Governor Abbott actually himself fall on this issue? I don't know.
Which also we did not mention at that press conference. The lieutenant governor was specifically asked about the governor's position on the bill. Mm-hmm. This was before Governor Abbott made those comments at the bill reform presser and was like, I got a lot of bills. We'll evaluate each one. And the lieutenant governor said, well, I know the governor's heart, I think was the exact phrasing he used to start off, and said, I'm not worried about the governor. Very interesting. Yeah. Like even how the onus was placed.
Well, he's got to say that whether it's true or not,
very interesting.
Right?
Yes. But knowing the governor's heart, like it's the implication. It was
deliberate wording.
It's it's always very deliberate wording. And I think that was very interesting. It was, and I think that's also notable in all of this is how emotional this topic seems to be for the lieutenant governor. Even just mentioning the governor's heart in a press conference is not typically the language we're accustomed to.
Yeah, no doubt.
Moving on.
Let's go.
Okay, let's talk bail reform. We've talked about it a little bit, sprinkled throughout the podcast already, but going into this session, other than school choice, we knew this was top of mind for the governor, and there were a slew of bills that made their way through the legislative process that were either explicitly bail reform or kind of bail reform adjacent. Mm-hmm. Some passed, some didn't, but we were wanting to specifically talk about the deal struck on a constitutional amendment, which requires 100 votes in the House and 2/3 in the Senate as well, so it does require a higher threshold for it to make its way through the process, and that's where everyone's eyes were okay, who among the Democratic caucus is going to cross over in order for a bill like this to pass?
I think this is the one place where Democrats really got a notch to win, I would say. Now, Abbott got something. He got the base of what he wanted with SJR 5, but there was more to the package than that. The various items, there were a couple enabling legislation, but the big ones, 3 constitutional amendments, SJR 1, which would deny bail automatically to illegal immigrants accused of crimes, serious crimes, like they call it the Abbott 9, I believe. That one died and did not go anywhere in the House. Like it advanced to the floor, but it was never going to get the votes on the floor because you need 12 Democrats. That never, I don't think, even came up for a vote until a last-minute Hail Mary after SJR 87 died. And so that one, I think, mandates judges withhold bail for repeat offenders of certain crimes. So that was a tougher thing to reach. And that had the probable cause language that was such a fight in the SJR 5 negotiations that I'll mention in a second, but a much stronger law from a Republican point of view, and that didn't get the votes. I think was that the one that got 97? There was something with SJR 1.
I know.
No. I got it wrong. They subbed in Jocelyn's Law as the name for SJR 87 when SJR 1 did not advance.
Yep.
So 87 comes up. It had been postponed multiple times over the course of multiple days. This is, again, the stronger language from the Republicans' point of view. And it did not get the votes. They fell 3 short. I think if they had gotten 2 more, the speaker would have been the 100th. But as it was, he was not going to vote on it.
Yeah, the prevailing wisdom was that they needed to, in all actuality, right?
And they couldn't get it, which is such a if I were on Abbott's team, I would be pretty miffed about that and despondent about it because you came so close, right? It's like almost winning the championship and
It almost makes it worse.
being the runner-up. Yeah. So they didn't get that, but they did get SGR 5, which this was the big deal negotiated, or the centerpiece of the deal negotiated in the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee between Republicans and Democrats. I think in committee only 2 Democrats voted against this, pushing it through. And it allows judges to deny bail under certain circumstances. So less stringent language as 87, but still a huge difference from where current law is, right? And so they were negotiating this back and forth for a while. Chair Smithy had said he'd been negotiating not just with the members of the committee, which included Joe Moody, who was kind of the ringleader of the Democratic side, but also with the governor's office and the Senate, and they settled on this language. One of the changes in committee was moving the finding language from probable cause up to clear and convincing evidence. I think it's probable cause. It's either, or there's preponderance of evidence. I don't know. They made it, the Democrats negotiated in a higher standard for a judge to deny bail. That's the long and short of it.
Which it's always interesting hearing Joe Moody at the mic on these types of issues, because he is not only on the Democratic side, the ringleader for criminal justice reform, but he is just a criminal justice reform expert in the House and has held many different leadership positions on that committee, in those discussions. I mean, this is his bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he gets on the mic, it is very indicative of how something might turn out.
Yep.
Now, with Jocelyn's law specifically, that did not yield that many votes in the end, but still, it's very notable when he gets on the mic just because of the position he holds and the expertise that he has.
But when that deal was announced in that criminal jurisprudence hearing, that was remarkable. These two sides have been at such loggerheads on this issue, with neither wanting to budge, and they managed to hash out a deal. And they got it. They got SGR 5 across the line. The governor held a press conference yesterday on Tuesday in Houston, spiking the football on getting this across the line, indicating, I think, probably he's not going to come back for another bite at the apple in a special session on this. Also, it would probably be foolish because the votes aren't changing. I don't see votes changing.
2 votes? You really don't?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
You don't think an arm could be twisted? I just think there are 2 members whose arm could be twisted.
They were
with
already
something.
twisting arms.
They
were already twisting arms.
It just was unbelievably close.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think so.
I'm not fully disagreeing. I'm kind of with you, but I also don't.
If anything, you lose votes.
That's true. It totally could go that way too. Yeah.
But regardless, I highly doubt this is going to come up as a special session topic. The governor, at least, is mostly happy with what he got after these many cycles of trying to get this across the line, and they finally did. What legislating is often, everyone wants to go throw a Hail Mary on the first play, but incrementalism is the better option almost in every case, because you need time to build consensus and to hammer out details of things. And I think this is the takeaway of this is to win for incrementalism over Hail Mary throw.
Yeah.
And
we should count how many sports.
A win for a West Coast offense rather than just Hail Marys on every play.
I don't get that at all.
A few people will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain it for me?
A West Coast offense is where you do short, quick passes.
Oh. Why is it West Coast offense? Did it just originate in the West Coast?
The 49ers, I believe.
The 49ers.
I think the 49ers invented it back when Joe Montana was quarterback, I think.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's not.
Screw the 49ers.
That's correct.
Screw the 49ers.
You want to say that one more time?
I just want to make sure people know that I'm very adamant
you're a
about it.
Seahawks fan. That makes sense.
Yeah. I feel like the rivalries died down a little bit, but in the height of the Legion of Boom, that was like our number one adversary. And then they got Richard Sherman, and we all were so mad.
Number 5.
Number 5.
The thing that almost derailed Sine Die.
The only really like Senate versus House debacle or conflict that made its way onto the public square.
Yeah, everything else wasn't like there were disagreements, but they came to a consensus on it. And they eventually came to a consensus on this, but it wasn't really clear that would happen until the 11th hour. And this was kind of an unforeseen break between the two.
Yes.
Yeah.
And very surprising.
Yeah.
And again, a moment where people were like, what is the lieutenant governor doing?
And they could have gotten this done so much earlier in session, but I think they just procrastinated on it. They're like, oh, of course we're going to give judges a raise,
I don't think they saw any problem would arise. Yeah.
Yeah. But there was. And the big issue, the reason judicial pay raise, trying to give judges a 25% raise from $140,000 to $175,000 a year, at least base salary, is that it is tied to legislative pensions. And that has torpedoed this in years past, including last session. But that's a political third rail because voting to increase your own pension is a bad look. Regardless, to put it lightly, regardless of the reason it's actually happening, which is to give judges a pay raise. So then the question came, can we delink this and solve this problem now without having and prevent us from having to deal with it down the road? And they finally did, but it went back and forth. And Friday before Sine Die, the Senate employed a maneuver that I hadn't seen before and no one had seen in a long time, where they took the House committee report that had the House, what they did was they struck language that just said the retirement benefits are a factor of blah, blah, blah times the base judicial pay. They struck the base judicial pay and just put 140, which was the current base judicial pay. So they anchored it to that number, right? And then they were giving judges a pay raise on top of that. Now the Senate opposed it, and they declared this not germane. Especially based on how they finally did this, I don't know how you can make a case that it's not germane, because they did something very similar. But the Senate declared on late Friday night, that section anchoring to $140,000 explicitly of the pension was not germane to the bill. And so they pulled this parliamentary thing where they passed a resolution telling the House that they agree on everything in the bill except this not germane amendment, pass that and strike this or replace it with some language. Now that language itself was interesting because it pushed off the effective increase on their pension by giving judges a $175,000 pay base salary. It pushed it off until the 90th legislature, until they act. Now the reason that was done is because there's this little thing called the emolument clause in the Constitution, where if you vote to increase your salary or any financial benefit, you cannot run for another office that you have increased that emolument in the same term. Now there's a lot of legal questions there, like what is a term? Does a term end at the next election? All these statewide offices are up for election next year. Is that the end of it? So it doesn't count here because we push it off to the 90th legislature? Or is it count like a 4-year Senate term? There's a lot of senators, one of which is already running for a higher office, but others that are looking at it, and maybe by the time this thing goes out, a couple of them have announced. But that is a potential trap that they might have fallen into if they had not gotten clever with this bifurcated language, kind of splitting the two things, the pension increase and the salary increase. So that was interesting to me when that was pointed out to me, and they eventually resolved it in a different way. But I've talked too much. You talk for a bit on this. what was you were watching this unfold on the last day?
Yeah.
From the office, what was going through your mind?
Also, full disclosure too, it had started to boil over the weekend.
Yeah.
And my family was in town for my baby shower. So Brad texted me, he was like, "This is crazy," and I was like, what could he possibly mean? And so I just brought up Brad's Twitter. It was like, what is he talking about? And I just did not foresee this being the straw that could potentially break the camel's back. So got up to speed. Came in Monday, and oh my gosh. I also think the reaction from staffers, from folks in and around the Capitol was in large part like, what is Dan Patrick doing? Because Sunday night it got really wild too with all those parliamentary procedure kind of things that were going on too.
Wasn't that Friday?
Am I misremembering?
It was a Friday that they did that. They passed the resolution.
You're right. I'm sorry. It was Friday.
Yeah. But then there were negotiations going on throughout the whole weekend.
And just watching, and again, this is why it's so politically interesting. And I'm going to try and weave this as carefully as I can in how I frame this. But you have going into session, and for many years now, Dan Patrick being the darling of the right wing of the Republican Party and finding himself on this side of this issue. And a couple of other issues this session was very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, did he have the political cover to make this kind of thing happen? I think it's very clear he does and did. But
he also got, earlier that week, got a lot of crap from that wing of the party over a couple bills that died in the Senate. It didn't pass by the deadline.
Was that Sunday? No, that was even before. That was like earlier in the week. That was before Friday. That was before everything.
That was Wednesday deadline.
Yeah.
Where
specifically
Senator Zaffarini moved to adjourn in the Senate, not recess, and this happened in the 24 hours of Wednesday, the deadline. And so and it was Senator Bob Hall, at least based on the Journal, I'm sure it matches up with the video.
Because this went under the radar in the moment.
But Bob Hall was on the dais with the assistant parliamentarian, I think, not Karina Davis, the head parliamentarian, and Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor. So Zaffarini adjourned instead of recessed, and so they ran out of. They couldn't then suspend things again, to suspend the rules again to pass things on third reading like they normally do all in one day, without 4/5. And Democrats did not. They held their ground and said, no, we're not doing that. We're going to kill these bills, and they did. They killed a few GOP priorities, and that caused a lot of abrasion towards the lieutenant governor.
And I think the bill that received the most attention in that was from Representative Daniel Alders over in the House. It was a bill specifically dealing with content of libraries and what minors have access to, which was a crazy wild debate on the House floor when that went through the process. But that is where a lot of the ire was drawn.
Yeah. Okay, so over the weekend they're fighting Jeff Leach and Joan Huffman. By the way, Joan Huffman was the only PNV on that resolution maneuver that I was talking about. Everyone else voted for it.
What's your read there?
Well, I think based on comments from Leach, she had agreed to the House language. It was everyone else that didn't. And
so kind of a good faith maneuver with the House.
Right. I mentioned the emoluments clause part, and that's definitely part of this, I think. But the main reason the main position they stated that they're opposed to delinking was because pension legislators don't get salaries. They get roughly $7,000 a year plus per diems during session, which is not a lot of money. So what a lot of them get is a nice fat pension, and that is a way to attract people to public service. Now, some would argue that's not the reason you go into public service, but not everyone in the building are millionaires, right? Like, not everyone's Mays Middleton, where they'll never has to worry about, or Don Huffines never has to worry about pulling a pension. Some of them, even though they're not poor, that is something they're counting on down the road later, right? And so their position was we need to enable pension dollars to increase along with inflation, at least for the most part, like we're trying to keep judge salaries in line with inflation, so that more people can have the ability, even if it means putting a payoff off until way down the road, more people have the ability to take this, to try and pursue this, so we don't just end up with a bunch of very, very wealthy people running everything, right? So that was their position. They got a lot of crap for that from the right-wingers out in the Twitterati. But that brings us to Sine Die, and the compromise they hashed out was a $175,000 pay raise plus eventually delinking. So in that original language where the House anchored it to 140, they ended up anchoring it to 175. So you get the immediate pension increase, but the further increases will be subject to the Texas Ethics Commission. And I think the first review for that will happen in 2030. So they kind of split the baby on this and tried to find a way around it that makes everyone at least happy enough. So
yeah, and I think it's worth noting too, like maybe folks not familiar with this issue, why were conservatives so great with raising judicial salaries and so opposed to any sort of pension deal on this. And it really comes down to, I mean, we heard at the beginning, like the State of the Judiciary address, judicial pay raises has been something the legislature's been trying to tackle for a very long time, because it's been a long time since there's been a pay raise, and the argument is to attract qualified folks into this into these roles to serve as judges in Texas. You need to be able to at least provide them with a salary that can kind of keep up with the rates at which inflation or salary increases are happening in the private sector. Are these salaries comparative to what these kinds of lawyers with this kind of experience could make in the private sector? Not even close. But but that's the argument, right? And like there was very, very, very little conservative opposition to raising judicial salaries in this way. Like that was just not part of the equation because of all of this other context and how long it had been since this had been tackled.
The people who did oppose basically just came down on they shouldn't get any pay raise whatsoever because judges suck. That was really the summary of their position. But yeah, I'm looking at the language right now, and it did, like I described, anchor it to 175K, the equation for pensions. But does that not raise the emoluments clause problem again? I don't know. I don't know. They have delinked it in a roundabout way, but they still provided a 175K base salary replaced in the pension section of the code. So that's something a court's going to have to decide. Who the heck knows? You know, someone in a black robe that now makes at least $175,000 is going to have to decide that. So, regardless, I was pretty confident they were going to come to a deal. What the heck that was, I don't know. But
the clock was ticking. It literally was the last day of the session when this all got ironed out.
They got it done. The speaker was over in the Senate negotiating with the lieutenant governor and the senators.
And you were watching folks come in and out between chambers.
I was watching the Senate conferees walk into the House chamber multiple times, go to the back hallway where they then went and talked. At one point I saw Joan Huffman walk in with, she had a conference committee report in her hand with a green paper with signatures, half the signatures, all the senators. So they were bringing it over to get the
The House
the
conferees.
House ones. And then I got sent a picture of them signing the conference committee report. All of the conferees from both sides tweeted it out. And then that was that. They adjourned sine die, and everyone went about their business partying.
Which is how this often goes on sine die.
Yep.
Okay, those are our top 5. Let us know if what we missed, if you disagree. But we were pretty anxious to talk about these top 5 moments, and I think it spans the entire length of session too. There were a lot of other moments we talked about potentially delving into, but these were our cream of the crop.
Yeah. You got any honorable mentions?
Let's talk about some funny moments quickly. Maybe some more lighthearted moments that tend to happen during session. I loved watching Synfronia Thompson, Miss T, a fixture of the Texas House and the legislature at large, get up on the front mic, offer an amendment to, I believe it was Representative Ben Bumgarner's bill.
Yep. Human trafficking and hotels, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, which he's passed legislation about massage part. Like, this is human trafficking, something that Bumgarner certainly worked a lot on legislatively. But Miss T gets up on the mic and gives a rousing speech about how she's going after the pimps. And I'm not mincing words.
Watch your back, pimps.
That's exactly what she was saying. And it was unreal. Like, Twitter blew up. She put out a clip of herself talking about it. People were just, it was hilarious. And of course the amendment passed and was tacked onto the bill, but it was a rousing moment from Miss T on the House floor talking about how she was going after the pimps.
I like it. Pimps are down.
Oh, but
Miss T's up.
Arguably the best part of it all was Cody Vasut was on the speaker's dais at that point, overseeing the process, and he goes, she moved adoption, and Vasut goes, Miss T sends up an amendment against the pimps. It was so funny. And I was laughing so hard because he said it with a straight face, and then the vote started and the bell rang, and it was so funny. But truly a moment that I think will live in infamy.
Well, I wouldn't say that's infamous. I would say, doesn't infamy have a negative connotation?
It can, but there's also, like, to live in infamy.
I think you need to look up the definition of infamy.
Well, I know what it means, but I feel like it's
I'm going to use Vasut as a conduit for my first
it is totally
honorable mention. Yeah. To you, Miss Editor.
Well, I knew
Edit
that.
yourself.
But I also think live in infamy can be used. Maybe not.
This
maybe.
isn't December 7th, 1941. Okay?
That was so nerdy.
So the one I'm going to go with is hashtag Gavel Gate, which was the Cody Caucus, Cody Vasut and Cody Harris, along with Brooks Landgraf, the Speaker himself, and I think, am I leaving anybody out? Anyone else broke gavels?
Was it? Did you mention Meyer? Wasn't he at the dais when the
Meyer? I don't think so.
When it broke?
No, that was
Landgraf.
That was
Landgraf.
Yeah.
You're right.
Regardless, there was about 4 members. Maybe there was one I'm not thinking of, who broke a ton of gavels because they banged the thing so hard. If you go over and look in the Senate, they just like lightly tap it. Doink. That's the noise it makes.
Doink.
Meanwhile, the House members are freaking ear splitting, especially when I'm sitting in the bullpen, in the press pen.
Which I think tells you a lot about the difference in decorum in both chambers.
Yes.
That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Is in the House, in order to be heard, you slam that thing down.
Yeah.
In the Senate, you can hear a pin drop.
Yep. So, Gavelgate was, I think it was up to like 25 or so gavels broken, somewhere
So
around
many.
there, by just hitting the thing and the head flying off and almost hitting clerks in the head. Landgraf on what night was that? Budget night?
I think that was deadline night.
No.
It was earlier?
It was earlier, when the head came off of the gavel and shattered the glass on the desk and brought things to a close for a bit when they had to replace it.
And clean up shattered glass.
Yep. So I'm going to go with Gavelgate.
Which also leads to questions about the quality of gavels. Has the quality decreased, or have members just gotten so much stronger?
That also opens up the discussion about who it is that's making these gavels. And
Yeah.
prisoners at a prison down in, I think, actually, Vasuds district or near that, and I think I heard that mentioned. They had to bring in a bunch of new gavels at one point because they kept breaking them. So
It's true.
I'm going to go with Gavel Gate.
Anything else?
I'll just mention quickly 3 several days is the Easter moment where he went into the grave.
Do we know it's a he?
Well, in the English, you see, in the English language, when we don't know the gender or the sex of someone, we say he.
You're really schooling me on the English language today,
Yeah,
aren't you?
I know. You should know how this works.
Yeah, it's true.
At least that is how it's been done throughout most of English history. I'm sure.
I was just wondering if you were dropping any hints as to who you think it might be.
No, I don't have a theory, and I'm not going to posit one on the podcast. So, 3 several days said, I'm going away. I can't do this anymore, basically. It's too much. And he disappeared. And then all of a sudden, he rose from the grave, came back, and is now still tweeting. I assume we'll tweet out this podcast when he or she hears that we mention him or her on the podcast. And welcome back, Sevs. Welcome back.
Welcome back, Sevs. We appreciate the Sevies and the listening and just the general joy you bring to Twitter.
Oh, yeah, we didn't mention in the top moments that both of us won a Sevi.
Kind of a big deal. But I think that means next session we probably won't get one.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah. So we'll just relish the moment for now.
Yep.
Okay. Let's talk quickly. We're over an hour already, but let's talk through the potential of a special session. Bill reform?
I don't think it'll be bill reform.
Not on the table, it seems.
I don't think so, no. Unless Abbott gets a wild hair and feels like he can twist some more arms to get the couple votes he needs, but I don't see that happening. A lot of buzz about one topic in particular on the special session this summer, redistricting. I kind of hinted at it a couple weeks ago on the weekly roundup in talking about the El Paso case. But from what I'm hearing, the talk is a congressional map special session. And
So not dealing with state legislative districts,
right.
just congressional.
Yeah. Now, obviously, all this is subject to change until the governor actually puts out a call, if he does, right? But there's a lot of pressure for Republicans to try and keep Congress next year after the midterms, which is already shaping up to be a difficult election cycle for them. First of all, just because of the natural ebb and flow of whoever's in the White House gets a bit of a recoil in the midterm, right? That just typically happens. But Republicans already have a very slim majority. I think, was it right now, 1 vote with some retirements that have happened or appointments that then went south and are no longer in Congress. So that's a lot of the talk there. The question is, though, how do you keep Democrats in town? Because if you just put congressional maps on the call, why would Democrats show up? What's the incentive for them to do that? It would be malpractice for them not to break quorum in that case. So what are they going to get in exchange? I think the only obvious thing that I can think of right now is a say in where the was it $11 or $12 billion in border reimbursement from Congress, where that gets appropriated.
Why do Democrats need to be in town?
Because you need to have 100 votes for a quorum, and Republicans only have 88 members in the House. Not an issue in the Senate. In the House, it is.
Which reminds us of several years ago when Democrats did break quorum and head to D.C. In opposition of, a very contentious GOP priority at the time, which was election integrity-related legislation.
And whenever this has been mentioned, or just, because there's been a lot of talk about redistricting this session anyway. It kind of died down, and obviously they didn't do anything with it yet, and haven't. But the question that I heard a lot was, wait a second, we already did that. I thought you can only do that once every 10 years. No, you can redistrict at any point. It's just usually not worth the fight politically to do it mid-decade. Sometimes it is, though. Back in 2003, when Republicans took the state legislature, they redistricted the congressional maps to basically flip it from a Democratic majority congressional delegation to a significant Republican majority congressional delegation, because the state politically had moved that much, right? So they did it. And both chambers broke quorum. Democrats in both chambers broke quorum. Eventually they passed the maps, though. So you gotta to learn lessons from the past. For the people that are either thinking about doing this or doing it, you gotta figure out a way to keep Democrats in town, at least enough of them. And there is 8 or so, maybe 8 to 12 Democrats in Trump districts. And I'm talking state house, who most of whom are along the southern border, who have a big incentive to get something back for their communities to compensate for all the stuff they've had to deal with over the last 6 years or whatever. It's the only thing I can think of that would keep anybody in town, and that might not even do it.
I was going to say, that's not even necessarily enough to hit quorum.
Right.
That's like
right.
Probably...
And that's what, if every Republican is there.
Like 5 or 6 still below. Yeah.
That itself will be tough to ensure happen, just because you have 150 moving parts, and for Republicans, 88 moving parts. Yeah, so I think that's the only way. And then you have to like assure them that you're not going to screw up their districts too. You're not going to also redistrict the state house, right? A lot of political game on this. As I say all the time when I talk redistricting, there's no taking the politics out of the most political thing we do. And a nonpartisan redistricting commission ain't it. I can tell you, they did that in Ohio, and it turned out just as contentiously
name.
and poorly,
yeah.
Right? They still got sued into oblivion over those maps. So, yeah, it's whoever is directing this to happen, which obviously it'll come down to Abbott to call the special. Him, the speaker, the lieutenant governor, if they're going to go about this, they're going to have to figure out a way, get pretty clever, how to ensure that enough bodies stay in that room to actually get a map through.
When you say learn from the past, would you also say that there's nothing new under the sun?
I might also say that, yeah. The other thing is they're going to want to see the result of this lawsuit in El Paso. And who knows which way that's going to go. That, regardless of which way that goes, it's going to get appealed. Whoever loses, that's going to appeal. But that'll at least give them a baseline judgment to use, to operate from, to either ignore outright or to use strategically whenever they decide, if they decide to do this, to pull the trigger on this. So
TBD.
And there are two, the reason Texas is probably a big target for this from the White House or congressional Republicans, whoever it is, because there's two very on the edge Democratic-held congressional districts in South Texas. Cuellar in 28, Gonzalez in 34.
When you're going into a midterm with a Republican in the White House and you want to at least aim to maintain a majority in the U.S. House, you'll look at all ways in which to get that done.
And I would not be surprised if Texas is not the only one
where this is being considered.
Yep.
And
I can tell you it's not the only one where it's being considered. We'll see who pulls the trigger, though.
Absolutely, including Texas.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's quickly delve into these last 2 points we want to make. You were talking about how things have not slowed down since the end of the legislative session. What do you mean by that? So
I'm going to hit the one I have listed last on this first, because I think it'll be a bit quicker, and then we'll hit the other one. So on sine die, the Senate nominates and elects a new president pro tem of the Senate. That lasts every cycle, basically, from the end of one session through the next session, regular session. It was Brandon Creighton, and so a couple times last year when both the lieutenant governor and the governor out of state, Brandon Creighton was the acting governor. So that's kind of the importance of this position. Other than that, it's ceremonial, right? Senator Charles Perry was named the pro tem this time, and they get up and they do these nominating speeches, talk about how great the person is, yada, yada, yada. Then the person gets up and gives their own speech. Well, I was watching the speech, and I hear Perry up on the dais, and he says, my speech is going to be a little unconventional, and it might make a few of you very upset with me, but here's what I'm going to say. And he went on a long thing. It's very like institutionalist minded speech about maintaining the integrity of the Senate and being a deliberative body and all that stuff. Well, one line stuck out to me, and he was very coy about this. He didn't name names. He didn't come right out and say what he was talking about. But if you know what he's talking about, you know what it's about. What I saw this session beginning to come up a little higher level of tender in tone that has not been there in the past, but it continually creeps out, will ruin what we are as the Texas Senate. From my understanding, he's talking about the effect of outside scorecards on how senators vote in the chamber. This has been a thing ever since I've been here. This has been a thing in the House. Not just the Mark Jones ratings, but Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. Does Texas Values have one? Young Conservatives of Texas, all those groups. We have a couple other bill rating groups.
And there's a bunch on the Democratic side,
there's
too.
There's a bunch on the Democratic side. It's been a really big thing to be the most conservative member of the Texas House or the most liberal member of the Texas House. It's just been less of it's still a thing in the Senate in terms of the Mark P. Jones rankings, but it's just less pronounced, or it has been. Well, I've heard throughout the session there's a lot of umbrage within the upper chamber about how much onus is being placed on those scorecards in dictating how members vote on bills. And so rather than having a bill that you might normally have unified, 31-0, you now have 5, 6, 7 nays. And it all goes back to how these things are scored, where typically they don't score lopsided votes, where it's all 31-0. And if they feel like they need a boost in the conservative rating, they'll vote against a bill that they would otherwise vote for. From what I've been told, that's the issue at hand. Now, some people say, who cares? Fair. But that's clearly not Perry's position. And he used his pro tem speech as an opportunity to specifically criticize this.
It's interesting, like you said, that there was some subtlety to it. There was no explicit naming of anything or anyone, but still very pointed. It's like you said, if you're part of those discussions or you know the temperature that the Senate might be at with those kinds of things. And it is, I think, historically far more prevalent in the House, where there's a gaming of votes and, okay, well, members, staff will ensure they know which votes mean something to which scorecards. That's like listed on their vote recommendation sheets, and it's very normal.
Yeah.
And some of that is also like just how it works, right? Yeah. Where you want to know, okay, actually, I don't know anything about this issue. Where does this group that I align with politically stand on it? That'll help me determine how to vote. And sometimes it's just gaming the system. And it goes both ways, where it's helpful to members who have an ideology, and it's also gaming the system a little bit. Well, but it happens on the Democratic side too.
Another big group that does it is TCCRI. But I'm
pro-life groups, you name it.
I'm very aware of different situations happening where members call one of these scorecards and tell them that they need to change their vote rec. Some of it's because they look at the grade and they think, oh, this group doesn't actually understand what the bill does, and they explain it to them, and they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we'll change it. Other times it's, it'll be more politically beneficial if you have it this way versus that way.
Well, we saw last session Mark P. Jones change how he scored votes in conservative rankings based on the local and consent calendar.
Cut out local and consent.
Yeah, and it totally changed how members were ranked from on the liberal to conservative scale.
Yeah. So that's an interesting twist to the Senate, and I think you can't ignore the fact that the blockage at the top of the ticket is coming undone at these statewide levels, statewide offices, where Paxton's running for Senate, Glenn Hager's on his way to A&M. Lieutenant governor and the governor are both still running for re-election, but they're closer to the end of their careers in those spots than the beginning, right? So things are starting to break, which means members that have been waiting for a while are getting restless. We had a whole NFL draft theme episode on this a year ago, but they're starting to prepare. And part of that is being the most conservative member of the Texas Senate that you possibly can be, or the most liberal, or whatever it is, or even, moving it to try and get a more conservative rating. I saw a preliminary rating. It wasn't one of these usual scorecards, but they had Terry Canales ranked as a more conservative voting record than about 10 or 15 Republicans. We've never seen that in a Mark Jones ranking. So we'll see what he comes out with. But everyone has their own agenda on this stuff, where they want to be placed, whether they care or not. And now that was a very prevalent thing in the House. And based on these comments, it seems like it's ruffling some feathers in the Senate.
Certainly. Okay, well, speaking of ruffling feathers, let's talk last thing here quickly about all the scuttlebutt that's happened since Sine Die.
Yeah, so Texans for Lawsuit Reform is very much under the spotlight at the moment. And I got a hold of an email that they sent out to, I think it was a pretty private list because I couldn't find a link online to it anywhere. It was just an email. Well, in it, they were very, very pointed they're giving like a recap of session. They had a good session section, which was pretty short, and then a bad session section, which was very long. So much so that I couldn't capture it all in just 4 screenshots. So, but in that, they were very pointed with Speaker Dustin Burrows and one member in particular, more than anybody else, Mark LaHood, freshman. The reason LaHood was under scrutiny here by TLR was he was seen as the swing vote in the House Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence Committee, through which TLR's pet tort reform bills went through. SB 30, the nuclear verdicts bill, talked about how that got pared way down. There was also the trucking bill. And then we've talked about on the podcast how this became a fight on the airwaves, on TV ads, radio ads, digital ads, all this stuff. Literally millions of dollars were spent either lobbying for or against this stuff. And it's an extension of the long-running fight between the business community and TLR and the trial lawyers in TTLA. So TLR President Lee Parsley is providing this kind of post-mortem, and did not hold back from these two. He said, Speaker Burrows appointed the members to both the JCJ committee and the House Conference Committee that ultimately killed the bills. In the end, our bills died, led by Speaker Burrows and assisted by Republican freshman members Mark LaHood, Andy Hopper, AJ Louderback, yada, yada. I went through a whole list of them, and 55 Democrats. He has a whole section. They have a whole section in here about LaHood, accusing him of skipping votes or fleeing the committee because he didn't want the committee to take up the trucking bill and a public nuisance bill. Pretty pointed criticism and allegations, right? Well, LaHood came out with a response, and you can see that email. I have the whole email on Twitter. You can see the response by LaHood, and he is just as scathing in his response. I'll just pull one quote. He said, "There was a path to getting something done this session to address bad actors in the legal and medical spaces. Had it not been for TLR's duplicitous negotiations, broken commitments, and relentless disrespect for our elected servants, we would have gotten there."
Whew. Talk about not pulling punches in either direction.
Right. And then Chairman Leach put out a statement kind of defending LaHood. Explicitly defending LaHood.
Very notable.
So this is just a fascinating fight. It was already a fascinating fight. This was going to be a huge issue, huge theme to watch in the election next year between TLR, who has always played in Republican politics, and trial lawyers who are increasingly playing in Republican politics. I think we talked previously about one law firm, one of the biggest in the state, is putting up a $10 million PAC to go play ball in these Republican primaries, specifically opposing TLR candidates. So there's this odd thread of the Republican Party becoming increasingly friendly to right-wing trial lawyers. It's just a thing. Hell, the speaker himself is a trial attorney. Now, he's also previously been an ally of TLR in past campaigns, but I don't think that's the case anymore with how scathing they were in that email. I can't imagine he's very happy with that. And also, the email read like it wasn't meant to be publicized. But I got my grubby hands on it and publicized it. But
the second time you said that today.
Yeah, it's actually the third. I said it in a text too. But this is going to be a bruising primary fight in the Republican primary next year, and lots of money to play with on both sides. Another interesting thread of this is it dovetails with two things. First, the relative affinity for, or at least no longer opposition to, trial lawyers writ large kind of dovetails in my mind with the increased populism in the Republican Party. It used to be the Chamber of Commerce party. It's not really that anymore, and at least not fully so. And TLR represents that old guard. You have a lot of opposition now to that. So there's that. Also, Governor Abbott replaced many of the old guard Chamber of Commerce type Republicans who would normally just vote with TLR lockstep. And LaHood is one of them. Steve Allison lost to LaHood. LaHood was an Abbott-backed candidate because Steve Allison voted to strip ESAs from the omnibus bill back in 23. He got ousted. LaHood's in. Now you have a new problem for TLR in their own priorities. They got Abbott got the school choice vote from LaHood, but now there's a whole new set of issues for TLR in this case because they did not get his support.
And what's colloquially referred to as the business community.
Business community, yeah. Additionally, LaHood got, I think, around roughly $300,000 from TLR in his general campaign because he has a bit, it's not purple, but it's not super red, his district. I don't think he's going to get that again. In fact, I think he may get a TLR-backed primary opponent, which is going to be quite the fight. So,
would you say you think this will be the story heading into the primaries?
No, because I think it'll still get lost underneath the whole Ken Paxton and John Cornyn fight. There's a lot of ways to go on that, whatever happens at the other statewides. But I can tell you this is what I'm going to be most interested in. And it has been the most interesting thing to me all session, other than the speaker and his ability to navigate the fissures in his chamber. This has been the fight over these tort reform bills far and away.
Which, if you want background, go read Brad's reporting. It's phenomenal. But
so I'm sure we'll have more updates on this to come.
Absolutely.
But, man, what a firestorm in just 2 days after session.
And like you said, much more to come, but we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention it on this podcast.
And I was when I tweeted this out, I was on a boat in the middle of Lake Travis, and I put it out there, and it just blew my phone up. So I did not get to relax much.
And it's been blowing your phone up ever since.
Yes. People have a lot of thoughts in both directions.
People have a lot of thoughts. Brad Johnson. Well, Bradley, happy Signy Die.
Happy Signy Die. We hit everything we need to.
We did, and more, and we went long. So bless
appropriate,
Jaden.
because
appropriate.
There's a lot that we needed to download on this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, folks, we so appreciate you listening. If you have not subscribed to The Texan, go to thetexan.news and do so. We so appreciate the support of our subscribers. It's how we do what we do. It's really what just ensures we can come to work every day and make this happen. Brad, why are you smirking? I'm asking people to subscribe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw a meme. Okay.
It always happens. You always see a meme at the most inopportune times. But folks, we appreciate you listening to another episode of Smoke Filled Room, and we'll catch you next month. That was really good. Jaden!